Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Through the Eyes of George YouTube channel. Today, what we are going to be talking about are 7 presidential pillars that the presidency is today. It never used to be like that, so let's jump right into it. Most of the information in this video comes from this book by Harlow Unger called Mr. President. This book goes through 7 pillars of the presidency and 7 precedents that George Washington set. Now, the first one is the power to set foreign policy. The second one is the power over executive appointments. The third one is the power over public purse. The fourth is the power to lead the nation to war without immediate consent of the Senate. The fifth is legislation by proclamation. The sixth is the power to enforce federal law. And the seventh and final is the power over executive privilege. Now, George Washington understood that to have a nation to work effectively and to work together, and being given the responsibility of the executive branch, he had to seize control over his duties as president, over the executive branch. Now, when the Constitution was written, the Federalist Papers were written, the Declaration of Independence were written, the presidency was actually rather weak. It didn't really have a lot of power. Now, the executive branch is today a very powerful branch of government, just like the legislative branch and the judiciary branch. So, the first one, setting foreign policy, setting the vision. Not necessarily everything that a president says happens. We see that today with President Donald Trump. We saw that with President Barack Obama. Some things that they wanted in foreign policy didn't happen and don't happen. But as a leader of a family, as a leader of a business like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, you set the tone. You set the vision as Jeff Bezos does, talking and relating and communicating to other companies, as a family, talking and communicating to other families, and as a nation, as a president, whether it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump, talking and communicating to other nations. George Washington refused to appear before the Senate to be below the vice president. Now, he refused to subject himself to do that for treaties and nominations. Now, Senate still does have advising consent. The Senate is a counsel to the President of the United States. They are not the chief executive. Now, in George Washington's first State of the Union, he set the vision, he set the tone, as I said. He talked about providing for a common defense. He also, and I quote, "A free people ought not only to be armed but disciplined, to which end a uniform, well-digested plan is requisite, and their safety and interests require that they should promote such manufactories as tend to render them independent for essential military supplies." Now, there's a lot of context within that speech that he made. George Washington also talked about instituting a national postal service and post roads. Now, George Washington understood the importance of setting the vision as a leader, setting the foreign policy, setting the vision as given responsibilities. If you're given responsibilities to your friends and say, hey, can you set up this gathering of people to do something? The theme. What's the theme going to be? Or as a president of a company like Jeff Bezos of Amazon. So you're president of a company. What's the vision? What do you want to do in interacting with other people, other companies? Jeff Bezos sets the vision for his company, just like the president sets the vision and the foreign policy. Imagine Congress setting the vision of foreign policy. Number 2, the power over executive appointments. It didn't used to be where the president nominates an appointment for his cabinet or UN ambassador or a representative for the United States to other countries or within the United States as a cabinet member. It didn't used to be like that. What George Washington did is he streamlined the process and eliminated endless debates in and out of committee before a member of the president's cabinet or an ambassador to a foreign nation representing the United States was made or was selected. Now, the House of Representatives still retains the appropriations to fund executive actions. The Senate can still reject appointments and treaties. What George Washington did is he ended the senseless and endless communication beforehand and instead put it after the president decides on somebody he wants to have as his wise counsel. The president, whether it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump, has the privilege and the right to have people around him that he thinks will most advise him on being the chief executive. Number 3, the power over the public purse. Now, just as today, as it was back in colonial times, the president, more so the Congress and the federal government, dealt with economic issues. Now, back in colonial times, the military was underfunded. They couldn't even pay the men of the army or the military for their service. So American, European, and industrial enthusiasts got together and poured millions and millions of dollars to basically defibrillate the American economy. Just as today, that happens. And on February 25th, 1791, that happened. Number 4, the president has the power to lead the nation to war without immediate consent of Congress. The Militia Act of 1792. Now, for example, today we have September 11th, 2001. Something happened to our country. President Bush, whether you love him or hate him, decided on something, went to Congress and said, hey, we're going to do this. He took action as the chief executive. He set the tone. He set the vision. Now, the reason for that is there were some brutal acts of violence against 900 Americans being killed and estimated 40 military officers being killed, with the freeing and murdering of the horses in the camp. It was a terrible defeat for military officer St. Clair. Now, what this means, this lead the nation into war without immediate consent of Congress, what George Washington did is he issued and asked Mad Anthony Wayne, a military official, to raise up 5,000 American troops, but he also asked Secretary Knox to set up a proposal of peace to these people that were brutally harassing Americans and American property. George Washington, as you will see throughout his presidency, wanted to pursue every avenue of peace and negotiation before going to war. Some presidents do that, and that's a good thing. Barack Obama did that, and President Donald Trump did that. Whether you love them or you hate them, they, in their own vision and in their own thinking, did what they thought was right, just like George Washington, and pursued peace to avoid war. Number 5, the power by legislation, by proclamation. George Washington made a neutrality act, or a proclamation neutrality act, because he was told and was found out that a Frenchman called Edmond Genet came over from France to undermine the presidency and the country of the United States, to go to war with Britain again. To say it very simply, there's a lot of context to that, but simply that's what happened. George Washington set a proclamation to bar American ships from contraband by modern usage of nations. He had Congress, or the proclamation was to conduct the impartial toward the beleaguerment powers, or talking about the beleaguerment nations. He didn't want to go to war with Britain or France. They just got done with the Revolutionary War. They were trying to build and prosper the nation of America, the infancy of the 13 colonies. So he issued a neutrality act to say, hey, hold on a second, we mean no harm. Now, the next act, the next pillar, or the next power is the power for federal law enforcement. Now, what happened, a little bit of context here, is the Whiskey Rebellion. Now, Congress made a law, the president, the executive branch signed it, and the judiciary filtered it to make sure that it was constitutional. It was a law on whiskey, or a tax, I guess you could say, on whiskey. A tax on whiskey, A tax on whiskey. And some people didn't want that. Some people didn't like that. And they got very violent and brutal, and they started murdering, and people by the tarring and feathering of residents in the area where they lived in Pennsylvania. They started to these people who were against the tax, I guess you could say they were very rebellious. These whiskey boys, as you see in history. They started to do very unbecoming things in their communities to revolt against this tax. Now, imagine today, you dislike something, an act of Congress, and you start rioting and pillaging and all these things that are very not harmonious with your community, with the nation, and very unsettling peace. Just like today, when people, on a very small matter, nothing to do with taxes, started rioting at Berkeley College because they didn't like the president, Antifa. Now, if anybody from Antifa is watching this video, what you're doing in rioting and looting and pillaging and committing acts of violence is very unbecoming. It doesn't show great light and to reach your goals. You can't reach the minds of somebody by acting violent like they did in tarring and feathering people. It doesn't work like that. You reach the minds of people by your words, by your deeds, by acting very harmonious with your opponent, by peace and negotiation, neutrality, like George Washington. Oh, George Washington is an old fart. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He got a lot done. Trust me. Look it up. Now, what happened is George Washington set out law enforcement or a militia to go and put down the rebellion. The people like Antifa today that are committing acts of violence, horrendous acts of violence against the nation and against the people because they dislike a policy of Congress or the federal government. Now, what this did is it strengthened the other two branches of government. It said, hey, as chief executive of the United States, I agree with this law that is enacted, how the judiciary branch interprets the law, that this tax on whiskey is lawful, and that Congress, the legislative branch, can make a law. He strengthens those two things of Congress saying, hey, I want to make this law on this tax on whiskey, and the judiciary branch interpreting that this tax on whiskey is constitutional. And he is enforcing that law. Moving on to the seventh and final pillar of power, the power of executive privilege. Now, in the 1700s, the Jay Treaty being enacted, the George Washington Neutrality Proclamation happening, the British withdrawing their troops and having peace with the Indians, and access to the Mississippi for furtherment of prosperity in our economy, there were some people in Congress that were upset that they didn't get what they wanted. Sometimes in life you don't get what you want. So before issuing the money for these, before issuing the money for certain things, Congress or some people in the appropriation side of the committee decided to withhold that money and wanted to see the confidential private papers of George Washington and other members of his cabinet and other members in the executive branch. And George Washington said, no, it's confidential. Not everybody has the right to see every piece of paper and every correspondence that you have as a leader of a family, as a leader of a company like Jeff Bezos. I don't have the right to see the confidential correspondence of my parents or the confidential correspondence of Jeff Bezos. Because imagine this, if as Congress got to see every single paper and correspondence of the president, whether it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump, when you're given information on something, you now have the responsibility of that information. So imagine if Antifa decided they dislike things that President Trump is doing. They have a right to protest, I understand that. But if they understood the responsibility of the information given as a state legislature, as a federal legislature or a politician, well, if they don't like it, then why don't they become the politician? And the responsibility of that information to act. I see those people as very childish in committing acts of violence towards people because they dislike what you're saying. That's very childish. I don't think they could handle that information, whether given from Barack Obama or President Trump, in handling the affairs of our country. Barack Obama and Donald Trump did very well as president in terms of acting very presidential and in their own vision, in their own insight to be presidential. Now, these two men, Barack Obama and Donald Trump, acted at certain times in their right to enact these 7 pillars of power. And these 7 pillars of power, as I stated, were to set foreign policy, the power over executive appointments, the power over the public purse, the power to lead the nation to war without immediate consent of Congress, the power of the legislative, the power to legislate by proclamation, and the power of federal law enforcement, and the power of executive privilege. I thank Barack Obama and Donald Trump for their service and being president and in currently being our president. It is a very large toll on somebody to do that. And thank you for watching this video. I know this was a long one. I don't really do that much, but I just wanted to give an insight into this book here called Mr. President by Harlow Unger. This is a very, very good book, and most of the information in this video came from that book. But thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to click the notification bell and click a thumbs up if you like this video. Leave a comment below if you have any questions or comments. I'll try to get back to you. Looking forward to talking to you soon.